We're excited. We made it to the last session of the day. I was integrally involved in planning the itinerary, the schedule for this event, and I'm not quite sure why I agreed to put myself last after such an esteemed. It's a little bit of a, I set myself up, right? Well, welcome everyone. Thanks for all of you for being here. I hope you have enjoyed your day. It's been awesome listening to the other presentations. For those of you who don't know me, I am Stephanie Lewis, the co-president of Mills and the co-planner of this conference. And I am a mindfulness teacher and coach, retired attorney, recently retired attorney, and retirement is awesome. I absolutely recommend it. The best decision I ever made. As I just have to stay retired, right? So this last presentation for the day actually follows from the previous presentation. And I'm really grateful for the chance to speak about this topic of ethical resilience because it's something that's really intrigued me and also perplexed me throughout my career. And it's this, what's really this is about is the cognitive dissonance that attorneys experience in their practice and how we navigate the ethical dimensions of our legal experience and how we do that with resilience. So in particular, I want to focus on the tension that inevitably comes up along the way between our professional values and responsibilities and our personal values. And that's been touched on, I think, throughout the day, at least in the presentations that I have studied, including the one that we just heard about myself. And this is not a presentation about the current state of affairs in our country, but of course, today's environment only exacerbates this issue to its own dimensions. And I also want to say that in this presentation, there's a lot of talk about social psychology and social psychology terms. I'm not a social psychologist, so when I'm talking about concepts like cognitive dissonance and ethical fading, I'm talking about it at a very basic. So law school teaches us, well, our professional responsibilities, competence, diligence, confidentiality, so on and so forth. Rule 1.3, California Bar and ABA model rules require attorneys to act with commitment and dedication to the interests of their clients. We've all heard about this before, and the ABA model rule 1.3 tells us that a lawyer should pursue a matter on behalf of a client despite opposition, obstruction, or personal inconvenience to the lawyer, and take whatever lawful and ethical measures are required to vindicate a client's cause or endeavor. And the lawyer must also act with commitment and dedication to the interests of the client and with zeal and advocacy on part of the client's behalf. And you've probably heard those rules, at least 5 times today, right? So while cognitive dissonance is not unique to the legal profession or life in general, it is somewhat unique in the sense that the tension is inherent in the role. We go into the practice of law with the understanding that there will be trade-offs and there will be personal consequences. That's part of what we sign up for. It's part of the contract as a lawyer. We signed up for it. And, in law school, I knew that there were things I would not do, like, this would not surprise you, I would not ever agree to defend the KKK, right? As much as I respect the ACLU, that is not probably a place that I could work. I knew that from a very young age that I had boundaries. But there are so many other ways that this shows up in the workplace that really wasn't on my radar in law school. Just as, of course, general self-care in general wasn't on many of our radars at law school. And I don't think I could have even named it as a contributing factor to burnout or a demoralization or a type of exhaustion until my mindfulness journey deepened. It was just there. That was just sort of a part of the pushing through. And this issue, it hasn't been ignored in the academic literature. There's some really great articles out there. But I couldn't find any quantitative data on the role this ethical protection plays in attorneys experiencing burnout, in attorneys leaving the profession or changing their roles. But depending upon the organizational culture that you are operating in and your own personal set of values, navigating these tensions adds another layer that can contribute to the mix of circumstances that lead to burnout or substance abuse or leaving the law altogether. In a 2021 article, Beyond Stress Reduction, Mindfulness as a Skill for Developing Authentic Professional Identity, Richard Rubin states that this disconnection between personal and professional values or personal and professional identity may be one of the most significant sources of psychological distress in the legal profession, in part responsible for the high levels of addiction, substance abuse that has long characterized the profession. So at its heart, ethical resilience is about how attorneys stay grounded, even in the face of ethical and human pressures that exist. And these pressures are accumulating, right? I mean, we have the client needs and the organizational demands and the legal constraints and the personal values, and within the organizational cultures, we have the focus on outcomes and efficiency and profitability. But we have had an impact, right? The mindfulness and law movement, the well-being movement has gained some traction. I mean, it's a real thing. Yeah. Self-care is increasingly on the radar for younger attorneys. Many older attorneys are interested in offerings that help them better navigate the stress of their profession. There's a growing focus and an expectation that employers consider well-being as relevant, that our identity is not totally subsumed by our role as an attorney, paralegal, or other legal profession. And actually, that expectation can create pressure and frustration all on its own when it's not met. And the work itself is increasingly becoming complex, fast-moving. The pace of adapting to new rules, new laws seems to have intensified. And of course, we have the addition of artificial intelligence that raises a whole host of new questions about supervision and confidentiality, transparency, judgment, changing roles for attorneys and paralegals. And it also amplifies the expectation or will that decisions and deliverables are going to arrive faster and at greater. So the demand on lawyers is not just to adapt, but to determine or redetermine in these new contexts how to do so with clarity and integrity, to understand what we are doing, why we're doing it, and whether we can actually stand by it. So there are many ways we can talk about ethics, and again, my colleagues in other presentations and panels have done so. What I want to explore in our time together is how do attorneys navigate moments when professional obligations and personal values pull you in different directions, and to do so in a way that protects both clients and your sense of self. And as we think through this, it's not enough to say that you only need to find an area of the law that meshes with your values, because the law gives choices about how to approach a legal matter and decisions about how to handle a case. And those decisions are often dictated by others. They're not necessarily in our control. And they may be dictated by human beings who don't share your values or who have other factors that they're considering when making that decision. So much of the tension can be driven by how to reach the legal goal as opposed to the legal goal itself. Since this is something we can't totally fix, right, by changing culture or policy because we have embedded in our professional values certain standards. And there's great value in those standards. The challenge is not fully to erase the tension, it's really to manage, reflect on, and navigate it with awareness, of course. So I want to talk a bit about what I mean by ethical resilience, and I struggle a bit with the definition. So as I'm using the term today, it's the capacity to maintain our integrity under conditions of stress, ambiguity, or conflict in ways that serve both our professional duties and our personal values.
Could you restate that, please?
Yes. It is the capacity to maintain our integrity under conditions of stress, ambiguity, or conflict in ways that serve both our professional duties and personal values. And I think in the slides, I think I have that definition in there. I'm not using the slides because I have a long plane ride, so I may change along the way. I don't know. Okay, so, and I had a lot of trouble settling on what it meant to me in the way that was more than theoretical or just pretty words on paper. And you might actually disagree with what I mean, or think I'm trying to be too practical here. So the struggle came in, first of all, I was thinking, okay, so it means acting in alignment with our values, aligned action, but realistically, we can't always be acting in perfectly aligned ways with our own personal values because right lines don't work in the context of our role, right? Integrity, then there's the word integrity. Well, generally, you think of integrity meaning being faithful to, consistently acting with our values, even in not so easy circumstances. Again, we can't always do that. That's not always possible. We're hired to fight for somebody else's values and priorities often. They're not always going to be consistent. So I think it has to mean something different in our context, the concept of integrity. Because if it doesn't mean something different, then none of us have integrity, and that's not true, right? Not prepared to say that. So I think, when we talk about ethical resilience, we're ultimately grappling with the boundaries we set with ourselves. And boundaries, they can be permeable, they can be rigid, and they can be flexible. And so we're not talking about rigid adherence to one's values or consistency and how we respond, irrespective of context, but more of a faithfulness to guiding values, a willingness to adapt to circumstances with honesty, care, and thoughtfulness. And as attorneys, an important part of those guiding values are our professional responsibilities. I think that was something Claire was talking about in an earlier presentation. But it also has to be practical and workable, right? It doesn't mean we always get it right, that we resolve every conflict perfectly. It's not possible. It means we stay aware. It means we're reflective, that we're committed to navigating these tensions, even when no easy answers exist. And workable, we can't spend all day naval games. We got to get work done. And biting off too much introspection at one time can be disorienting and destabilizing. Yet every day, we decide what battles we're going to fight, right? We don't die on every hill. We don't take on every battle. At least I hope we don't. And we need to do that here too. Not every hill is yours to die on. So we wisely choose what and how much we work with through our mindfulness practice, and we give ourselves grace as we do so. So resilience isn't shaped by avoiding dissonance, but by how we sit with it, how we reflect on it, and how we decide we can live with, and how we decide what it is that we can live with. And sometimes that awareness, it doesn't give us clear answers. It just gives us the opportunity to recognize that there's a conflict. Sometimes it teaches us something that informs our future choices. So part of our learning, part of our growing. And sometimes it calls us to act in ways that are life-changing, that are hard. But every time it moves us closer to understanding who we are holistically, not just in our role as an attorney. And I think that is part of the message that our prior panel was talking about. It's easier to simply go with the flow, right? Ignore the signals that we're getting in our body that tells us something is not in harmony. And for many people, that is far more preferable than actually facing themselves and facing what's in front of them. And we all have our own journeys. There's no judgment there. And it reminds me, I was talking with someone in my then client organization, and he said, "So I hear you doing this mindfulness stuff. What is that all about?" And so, I gave him the John Kabat-Zinn definition before that. And so he says, "Well, I don't think I want to be aware." I was like, okay. And he says, "And I like being judgmental." I was like, "Yeah, I know." And you're not alone, right? Right? If you ever want to know more, just let me know. I think that's probably most people, right? But we can. I think as I was thinking about this, we made headway on the self-care part of the journey, I think, and mindfulness as a way of helping to reduce stress and making ourselves more aware of what we need from a self-care standpoint. And we can make a lot more progress. I believe, I see it, we're going to get there on that. But even if we get there, this is still here, this tension, right? And, continuing to silently hit at the heart of who we are and how we see ourselves. I think that's part of solution, the self-care piece, but it's not all of the solution. I'm skipping some things around some things because I want us to actually practice and do some movement. So at its best, ethical resilience helps us recognize when we're under pressure or facing ethical tension. It helps us to reflect instead of react, to understand our boundaries with ourselves, make choices we can stand by, even in challenging environments, and can help us sustain our career. I think we've had many examples during presentations during the day where people talked about people just walked away from being a lawyer and, didn't really have the tools and the skills to actually help them see that they could continue to be a lawyer, thrive as a lawyer, and navigate all the things that we weren't really prepared to navigate. So it's not just an intellectual process, it's a somatic one, it's an energetic one. And, it's, as has been said, repeated throughout the day, a lot of it comes from being connected, understanding what our body is trying to tell us. So, just to say a little bit about the legal ethics versus personal ethics, since that's my focus here. So legal ethics, that refers to the professional rules governing our conduct, what we must do, right? Confidentiality, the competence, the diligence, the loyalty and candor and integrity and all of that stuff. And then there's the personal ethics, is what we're called to do. And that's shaped by our morality and our values and our conscience. And it's a very personal inquiry. What is a personal ethic to you and to me is going to maybe completely different. Years ago, I was at a function for the firm that I worked for, and at the time, my background is employee benefits law and administrative law, and at the time, I was doing a lot of executive comp work, drafting up executive comp plans and arrangements and so on. And someone, I don't remember who he was, was sort of questioning the morality of doing that. And I was fine. I wanted one of them, I was I was doing this like, how come I can't have one of these? I think today I would feel somewhat differently because things are different, now. So for him, it would have been something, he couldn't do. I had no problems doing. Death penalty, for instance, I would never want to be involved in a death penalty case, right? For a lot of other people, that's not an issue. So these are all very, very personal. And it can show up in many ways, right? Advocating for physicians we find morally troubling, like for me, the death penalty. Protecting client confidences that disturb us. Facing pressure to use technically permissible but questionable tactics. And again, that's going to be context specific as well. In some contexts, an aggressive litigation strategy is overkill. And for others, it's like the only way, right, to actually get any headway for your client. If your client actions have significant harmful impacts on people, and feeling pressured to push boundaries, we believe cross ethical lines. And so our professional duty is clear, but we may still wrestle with feeling complicit in the conduct we personally oppose. And the legal ethics presents hard boundaries for us about how attorneys can resolve the conflict. I mean, you've got California Bar Rule 1.6 that protects any attorney from revealing information protected from disclosure by Code Section 6068. Basically, where it's pretty much limited to a criminal act that might reasonably be believed to result in substantial death or bodily harm. So there's limits on how attorneys can ameliorate that tension within them. But it's rarely sort of the single, big moment like you find in whistleblower retaliation cases that wears down. It's really the steady day-to-day, the day in and the day out accumulation of the tensions. And over time, exposure to routine compromises or constant subtle pressures can lead to what is called ethical fading. So this is when actions that once might have raised an ethical red flag become so normalized that they're no longer seen as ethical issues at all. The professors Ann Tendrus-Brunsel, I hope I'm not mispronouncing it, David Mezek describe it. The ethical dimensions of a situation fade from view, and as a result, we no longer experience dissonance between our behavior and our ethical standards because we stop framing, or never did frame, the situation in moral terms. And as Michelle mentioned in her presentation on bias yesterday evening, that we all have bias, right? We all have some sort of bias. The same can be said here as well. We all engage in ethical fading in some form or other. We go along with team decisions or participate in group conversations. We acclimate to the environment around us. It becomes part of the day-to-day, and we're still generally good people. It doesn't mean we're bad people because we engage in ethical fading. But we can also cross the line into what's called moral disengagement. And this was a concept explored by the late Stanford University scholar Albert Bandura. And this refers to situations where we do recognize the ethical issue, but we find ways to justify or distance ourselves from it. There was, Claire, I think it was you earlier today, talking about situations where people are lying and they're just getting away with it. Nobody's really sort of stepping up and to confront it. And so, it can show up in a lot of different ways. The end justifies the means. Comparing it to something that's far more harmful that, where they've gotten away with it before. Using neutral language that hides the harm. gaslighting, disputing that there is a harm, or blaming the victim. And we're seeing that in in states right now, right? Not just in perhaps some legal offices or corporate offices, but in bigger settings. So ethical fading, we don't see the ethical issue. Moral disengagement, we see it, but we rationalize or we distance ourselves from responsibility. So mindfulness allows us to check in with that discomfort we're feeling, to acknowledge it, to internally inquire into the tension within and choose how to best navigate it. It helps us, ideally in baby steps, not taking it all on at one time, take a circumstance and work with it as part of our practice. So I invite you to just take a few moments yourself and reflect on where you feel discomfort or tension between professional and personal values, if you do. And if you were going to integrate this tension into your mindfulness, what small circumstance would you choose? And you don't, I'm not really expecting a sharing. This could be very personal. If you want to, you're welcome to. But, I just ask you to reflect on that for just a few seconds. Where do you feel tension between personal and professional values, and what small circumstance would you choose to integrate into your mindfulness practice? Yeah.
Could you, I'm having trouble when you talk about integrating it into your mindfulness practice. Like, I obviously understand the concept of I would never work on a death penalty case or whatever. My client, I know my client wants to lie on the stand and all the misalignment or the dissonance, but I'm trying to imagine how during my meditation practice or in terms of mindfulness, let's just say I had right now, I don't, but if I did have a client who I knew was going to lie on the stand for whatever reason, other than just kind of going through the I can control what I can control part, what it means to integrate it.
Well, what it means to, so you've already acknowledged it, that it is a ethical dilemma. There may be circumstances where it's not necessarily that circumstance, where it's not acknowledged and you sort of need that to sort of come up from underneath. But also getting allowing the practice to lead you to a place of how you intend to respond to, what it is that you can, sort of where your boundaries are, where your lines are. And it may be that in this particular case, there's not a whole lot you can do about it. You can inform yourself about how you are going to proceed in the future.
So I think a lot of times that kind of issue is not so clear,
Right.
that we're drawing inferences or we have suspicions that something's happening, but we can't be 100% certain.
Right.
And I would think that some mindfulness practice of grounding and trying to get into a clear space might help to sift out. I don't really know the part of you that really you don't know.
Right.
From the part of this is what I know.
Yes.
And based on that, what's the right thing to do? Because I was a trial attorney for many years and I didn't have many of these, but sometimes things would happen and I would think, oh, I think this is what's going on. And sometimes it was just my own assumption or my own suspicion and my own intuition. And I may well have been right. But what you decide to do at that point can be pretty darn significant. And relying on whatever it is you're telling yourself could be not the right thing to do.
Right. Thanks.
Is it that the mindfulness practice helps you engage with the tensions
Yes.
so that it doesn't become ethical fading and it doesn't become moral disengagement, right?
Yes,
So
that's part of it, yeah.
You know, everything you're talking about today or this afternoon reminds me of the writer Byron Katie
Mhm.
in her book, The Work, where you ask, like, is it true?
Yes.
Yeah.
And because I think so often we just go off on these like fantasies. I do. I can use an I statement. I can go off on these fantasies in my head and none of it is even, it's not true.
Sort of building off on the assumptions, I think a mindfulness practice can help you, can help me, keep it personal, can help me sort of check the judgment that led to the assumptions and be curious enough to want to confirm the assumptions before I react to them.
Mhm.
See if what I think is going on is actually how it is what's going on, and be comfortable living with that result, even if it's not what I suspected.
Right. Right. Thank you.
For me, there are many times when I feel something in my body, but I don't know what it is. And so sitting in mindfulness, I can just let my attention go to that space and I kind of just picture it blooming. So then it comes up. It really helps me to figure out what it is I'm worried about. And it's not even in my cognitive brain yet.
Yeah, that's beautiful. Right.
The reason I asked Chris and Ron and Karen the question I asked was when you deal with particular, and I had a particular opposing counsel in mind, if you couldn't tell, when you're dealing with the same thing over and over again, you do want to be a good person and you want to be a kind person and you also want to protect your client, and those I think are the things that come to tension. And it's a really uncomfortable place to be in, because at the end of the day, you know, if you lose the case or whatever, you're going to survive, but then you have to look at yourself in the mirror and know how you acted. So I asked Ron and Chris and Karen, who were smarter than me, how you deal with this. I'm like, can you make this any clearer for me? And I'm not sure they did. They did give me some wisdom, but I think what everyone's pointing to is this stuff doesn't get clear. It doesn't ever get easy. And I think what you're saying is really helpful, because it's almost like sometimes we can tell ourselves that mindfulness and compassion, you know, makes things all clear and calm, but they never
They
do.
don't.
It's really more about dealing with the lack of clarity and the lack of,
Exactly. So well
that's
put.
the skill. That's the goal. That kind of sucks a little bit.
Well, I mean, it kind of takes me to what I had further down in the presentation. A major scholar in this area is a Georgetown professor, David Lubin. And I'm going to share with you, he provides some suggestions, for how to, for resilience and integrity. But at the end, it was kind of disheartening because, he ends it with, in this article, if any antidote for integrity can be found. Which is, rather disheartening. So, basically he's saying there's no magic fix, but there are practices that can help. I know, not kind of fun, right? But we already know that, right? The practice of awareness is not a magic fix, right? It's the hard work. We're here because we are willing to do the hard work and sit in the discomfort and sit in the unknown, and sit in the tension and do the best we can to respond to it in a way that is as reflective as we can in terms of who we want to be, how we want to show up in these situations, and then giving ourselves grace when we don't get it quite right. And we just continue to do that. We come back to that. One other point I want to make is that a lot of the tensions, the challenges that we face are really not about individual choices, right? We live in systems, right? And the extent to which we deal with them on a day-to-day basis is largely based on the culture of the organization in which we work and that organization's leadership. So it can actually change. And I've certainly been in that circumstance where you have a really good leader followed by a really bad leader, and things change very quickly. I was talking about my own personal circumstance. I wasn't talking about the country. And you know, I mean, within the organization, it's more than an ethics code, right? I mean, Enron had a formal ethics code, right? It didn't help them. And for those of you who are too young, there might be people in here too young to know about Enron, but it was an energy company in Texas where there was widespread accounting fraud. It was endemic in its culture, and it was a big deal. So it's something that's shaped and supported by the environment that we're in. And it may be that you operate in an organization that does support your ethical resilience. Is Cookie here? You stepped out. Yeah, I mean, I think I've heard her sort of talk about the organization that the firm that she's in and how supported she feels. But do you have examples of when your organization supported your ethical resilience or made it harder for you to act on your values? Or do you have ideas for how an organization can support ethical resilience? I know it's the end of the day. It's nasty to think. I'm sorry.
I had one that was pretty minor, but it was very formative for me because it was in my first few years of practice. And I was at a law firm where the client, we were scheduling depositions, and he said, let's tell them we're not available on Mondays and Fridays because I don't want to make the travel easy for them, because they were coming from the I forget, another part of the country, doesn't matter. And I was like, I forget how I first kind of gently said, I don't like that idea. And then later when he insisted and he was like, wait, I thought we weren't going to do it on Monday and Wednesday, I said, that's really not a good way to practice. And then he went to the partner who I was working for, and they actually said in my review a couple of months later, like, you know, you need to be more mindful of the client, blah, 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 blah. And they were basically saying, this is interesting, I hadn't thought about it till this moment. I took it as when they say make it difficult for the sake of making difficult, you should do that to keep the client happy. And again, it was a minor thing, but the idea that this big prestigious law firm was kind of saying, purposely be obstreperous for the sake of pleasing the client. And that was the culture that they were satisfied with, was really disheartening for me. And I left not so long after that.
Yeah, thank you for sharing that. And it might not be very unusual either. Right? Judy?
Yeah, I had a situation where we had a trial coming up the next day. And I took a last look at something that I was responsible for, and I found a serious problem, a serious statute frauds problem, actually. And I went to the partner and said, we have a problem. We were sitting in the lunchroom, and I was trying the case, and I remember him saying, don't worry about it, just go try the case. And so I got to the courtroom and I made my opening statement, and the other side moved for a non-suit based on the statute of fraud. So they had seen it. And it must have been at the last minute that they saw it too, because we hadn't talked about it for a long time. And it was granted. And I mean, aside from like everything that happened internally for me, which was pretty intense, I couldn't have been 27 years old. client was furious, and the firm chose to, apologize to him on its own behalf for not seeing the issue, and it kind of threw me under the bus. I know, it was sad.
Thank you for sharing that, Judy. I was.
Okay, I have a positive one. I was interviewing with the firm I'm with now, and the senior partner took me and my husband, who's my partner, into the conference room. And he was so kind to the staff people that were bringing us into the room, and he knew them by their first names, even though they didn't work for him directly. And he was, and I just walked out there going, if that senior partner takes the time to know the name of a legal assistant who doesn't work for him, and to show that kind of compassion, really, and respect, then I want to know more about this. So it can kind of work.
It can work both
I had the
ways.
other stuff too, but
Yeah,
we can look for those moments of
right,
compassion and respect.
right.
So I want to throw a positive one out there as well, Stephanie. So I started at UNM in 1998. And that fall, a trans female woman had stuck a flyer into all of our mailboxes, the faculty. And this was really before people were talking about these issues. And it just said that she didn't feel comfortable. And it was a beautiful kind of a dancer. She didn't feel comfortable in, the restroom situation, explaining that. And it's a state school, like we have to ask permission to do anything. And the dean just went to Home Depot, literally, and just turned one of the bathrooms into a gender neutral bathroom. And I was so amazed. I was like, this is unbelievable. This would have taken, 3 years and a study.
That's a terrific example.
Yeah.
Yeah. I actually don't know how much time we started.
Well, okay, so we kind of have to ask everybody's permission to go over a little bit because of the CLE rules that require Stephanie to keep talking for a little while longer.
Right, so we started maybe like 25 minutes later. So even if you go, I'll just continue to talk. No, I'm serious.
We have, like 5 minutes of announcements at the end?
Probably more like 10.
Well, I got a story. So, we're just helping you.
Hold on one sec. So 4:30 to this, and then can everybody stay for an extra like 5-10 minutes for the announcement?
Yeah.
Yes.
Well, that means we won't be able to do the qigong, but that's.
Do the qigong now?
Yeah, but I have.
Your choice, your call.
Anyway,
So I was a baby lawyer and I worked for a union side labor firm and I got sent down to your state, Arizona, to get a Safeway worker their job back because they'd apparently been stealing time, which is a time card violation, which is a big no-no. I think I've been sworn for about 3 months. And I got down there and, I came from Temple Law. I'd been trained in the ways of trial advocacy. And you have about a night to prepare for these things. I got flown in and got with the agreement and with the union rep and did a great cross-examination of the worker and got him to admit he did everything.
wow.
Every single thing. Just walked him right down the line. And I was like, it's not true. The union rep looks at me and goes, we didn't know, I've been practicing for 3 months. And now I'm going into an arbitration the next day to get this worker their job back and they've got to testify. And, my blood went out of my hands. My hands are getting cold right now thinking about it. And, we weren't on cell phones. This was 1997, I didn't have a cell phone. I had to find a partner. I had to figure out, how to get in touch with somebody, but I did get one of the partners on the line, and he called me Reggie for whatever reason. He said, "Well, Reggie, sounds like you did a good cross-examination." And I said, "Yep." He said, well, let's walk through this. We got to go ahead with the arbitration. We can't pull it because they're not going to pull it at that point. So what are you going to do? And I said, well, I know what I'm not going to do. There's questions I can't ask. And I'm just not going to ask the questions. If we got to go forward. And he walked me right through the ethical canon, right? What I can do, what I can't do. What you can't ask, what you can't. I can't be the one. That guy's going to lie. It's not going to be because I'm asking the questions, right? And boy, that was a horrible feeling though, going in, because I assumed that the other side was going to, and then I'd just be sitting there and he's just not telling the truth. I got the union rep there, but it's not going to be on my dime, right? I'm not going to be the one suborning the perjury. Well, the other attorney hated my client so much, was so angry at him, she just blew through all this stuff and never got to the question for whatever reason during the whole hearing.
Wow.
And we somehow danced through this hearing and it never came out. And I'm just sitting there, I'm like 3 months into this going, well, how the heck did that happen? Okay, so we get through, like, anything more? No, submitted. We're done. Yeah, exactly. It was one of those. Right? And arbitrator looks around and goes, okay, well, I'm gonna, send in your post hearing brief and we'll make a decision in the next 30 days. And I thought, wow, this guy's gonna get, I'm gonna win this thing. This is horrible, right? But it's okay. I guess it's a win, right? And so then I get the call 45 days later from the union rep. Hey, Jonathan, you won. You won the arbitration. And I said, oh, wow. I said, what do you think? He said, well, sometimes maybe you shouldn't be so good because we don't really like that guy so much. I said, well, I didn't do anything. He said, I know. And I said, well, what are you going to do? He said, well, I got to just tell you a story because he got all this back pay, right? He got all this money, like $50,000 in back pay, right? And he went into the store the next day, right? After the win, it was all, I got my money, I'm back to work. And everyone was like that. Guess what?
You got hit by a car.
No. Guess where almost all that 50K went? Child support. So that was a winner. And I'll tell you, the partner who walked me through this.
Yeah.
And I'm not with that firm anymore. I haven't been there a long time. He and I are still great friends. I had lunch with him yesterday. And we're just dear brothers.
He took you under his wing.
Walked me right through it, got me right through it. It still didn't feel that great though. Right? You're wobbling all the way through it, but held on to it. But anyway, so just helped me out a little.
Thank you, Jonathan. Okay, so I'm gonna run like really quick through the suggestions. So Professor Lubin reminds us ethical real resilience isn't just about good intentions. It's about our actions. And he recommends enhanced awareness. Noticing when you're blaming others. Carefully choosing your canary. Where's your line? Where's your boundary? And understanding that may shift over time, that when you first start, it may be a very naive line, right? And we change and grow. But that's your touchstone to come back to. So as part of your practice, sort of coming back to that touchstone. And then he recommends Socratic skepticism. Making a habit of questioning your own righteousness. Examining your moral beliefs and scrutinizing your own behavior. So knowing yourself with a certain ruthless irony is how he puts it. So it's really about cultivating your clarity, right? So, the kind that lets us see ourselves but and hold on to our integrity. And I don't think he's talking about doing it with kindness necessarily, right? But I would add that. And we have this, a lot of what's going on, like the ethical fading, is completely unconscious. And of course, that's where mindfulness comes in terms of awareness. So a couple of things to think about is, paying attention to the bodily clues, recognize, right? When you're being ethically charged or you've got an ambiguous situation. Because we all know that the body knows things well before the mind catches up with reflecting, pausing and asking, what am I doing and why? What values or obligations are in tension and what am I avoiding? What am I rationalizing? And bringing a sense of non-judgment, a sense of curiosity, and a sense of patience to this. And this isn't Dr. David Lubin, this is me talking. So bringing a gentle inquiry to the process, not shaming yourself. And I came across I think it was a podcast transcript with Sharon Salzberg where she said sometimes we say the healing is in the return, not in never having wandered to begin with, which is the fundamental basic principle of continuing to come back. And understanding that resilience isn't perfection, that this is a journey of its own, building resilience in difficult ethical situations and in that capacity to come back and grow from the process. And realigning, reconnecting to the core commitments, and those commitments include our professional values, right? The competence and the diligence, but also we've got, honesty and respect and that type of thing. And, understanding that, this analysis process is really about cultivating a flexible strength, not a right line rigid strength, because that generally doesn't work in life. And then, of course, acting intentionally, right? Maybe you set a boundary. Maybe you raise a concern, right? Maybe you do a little more research and you have a respectful inquiry to the partner who is giving the wrong answer. You seek counsel maybe from a mentor when you can ethically. Maybe you accept that decision is not yours to make. And that's a pretty valuable lesson I got from a boss. I was upset about a decision. And he said, but you can respect that it's their decision to make. I was like, yeah. I mean, it sort of took the whole weight off of my shoulders. I was not hired to make that decision. And there's the question about whether you want to be associated with it. That's that's another inquiry. Maybe you request reassignment. Maybe you find a new job or a new profession, but you have a range of options and a range of choices that allow you to move from that silent discomfort to a thoughtful action. Not turning into an intellectual exercise only, but an embodied one. Okay. So you have to come back to another Mills event to do Qigong with me and meditation. Had a wonderful practice. Maybe I'll record it and just sort of add it, sort of separately after I get home. And I'll
do it on one of the Zooms.
Yeah. No, I mean I can record it and I can give it to Laurie and we can put it in the portal. So. The practice that I was going to, it was really lovely.
It is lovely.
Just kidding. Anyway, so what I hope you carry forward is that legal ethics and personal ethics, as we all know, sometimes clash, but it's normal. It is part of what we signed up for. And, part of what we can prepare ourselves for and learn how to navigate with, not always a sense of ease, but a sense of confidence that we can navigate it, that we have a process that helps us, that supports our navigation. Ethical fading, moral disengagement are not necessarily failures of character. So I put in the not necessarily because we all know that sometimes they absolutely are. Right? And resilience means staying awake. It means being honest and being thoughtful when the system is pushing us to drift in a direction that we do not feel comfortable. So thank you for your attention. Thank you for